sort of wanted to bring you in now, sort of, Anthea, and talk about, you spent a lot of time in West Africa. We talked a lot about technology, and maybe that's a place, where technology is vastly different to how we know it here. They are, you talk about getting them to a place where they can skip the mistakes we've made. That's a very idealistic view, how they've gone straight to the mobile instead of the landline and stuff. They always talk about those leaps, but are you optimistic about them making a leap to a greener society, or do you think that they're just sort of, it's a time lag and they're going to go through and sort of make the mistakes that the Western world has made?
Well, the biggest issue in Africa that nobody seems to want to talk about is the fact that there's still the big countries that are still taking out of it. It's simple as that. Is people are still extracting everything they can out of Africa from colonial times. So it's been very difficult for a lot of African countries and governments to have their own legalities, to have their whatever they have back. So people are mining all over the place and extracting because there's so many natural resources that the world needs. So, for example, I don't want to go too in depth into it, but the effect China has on the continent of Africa itself is terrifying. The fact that Angola was one of the most expensive African countries, or most economically advanced countries, but they're in billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of debt to China because they've given over rights to their natural resources. So it's just taking one step forward and then 3 steps back, really. So Senegal, I can speak for Senegal and I can speak for maybe Tanzania because I have experience of living in those places, but Senegal's becoming a lot more progressive, but also it's really scary what's happening in terms of the economy. Senegal has a huge natural resource of fish, which feeds their economy, it feeds many other countries, but they've basically given away a huge part of their fishing rights to China, which is very scary.
There's a lot of scary stuff that none of us know about. I didn't know that.
So basically what's happened is China's gifted a railway or a train service to go from Dakar, the downtown area of Dakar, to the airport, which was also gifted by China.
That's a very imperial thing, isn't it? The British, we gave them the railways. That was a thing for a long time.
China, they do that quite a lot though, because they've also my dad was telling me this the other day. They find loopholes and passageways into other countries to export their goods and import goods, and they do it very well. They work with governments by not telling other governments, and somehow find loopholes, and they transport goods, and that's why so my dad read this book, I don't know what it's called, but he was saying that by the next big culture, you see a lot of Asian people, Chinese people everywhere, but you're gonna see even more now because they transport goods, export goods, which means people obviously move to that country, or you'll see a massive increase of people going from China to America and maybe even Africa. Because that's what my dad was saying, was that a lot of Chinese people are going to end up working and living in Africa itself.
It's already happening. I have 2 little points to say on that. So in Senegal, first of all, the Chinese government also helped pay for these new highways, but the people that made the highways were not Senegalese people, they were all Chinese. And so there's been speculation as to how they got to Senegal, first of all, but it's also, they think, it's maybe gossiped about or talked about that they were all Chinese prisoners that have been given reduced sentences to go over to Africa to build highways, which is a huge, itself, that's a really big controversy. But also I traveled by myself in Ethiopia last year, and I was outside of Addis Ababa, the capital. I went to the Omo Valley, which is where a lot of tribes, where I was doing personal working on projects with tribal communities. But everywhere I went, because I have white skin and I'm seen as a Westerner, but everyone would say, "Oh, China, you're from China," basically, and I had to get, no, I'm not actually. But that's because there's already such a huge influence there. There are signs in very rural parts written in Chinese in very small parts of East Africa and Ethiopia, which in itself is sort of like, that's what's happening and that's what's going to keep growing. And I read this week only that Russia is starting to say that they want to have more of a part in sort of general, they generalize all the time. They always say Africa. There's 50-something countries in Africa. It's a bloody big continent.
So many people do it.
Africa should have like one single currency for the whole of Africa, like a centralized currency, because there's more than one currency in Africa, right? I think it should be like, they should have one currency.
West Africa there's a few countries in West Africa that share the same currency. So I think it's Burkina Faso, Senegal, Mali, maybe Mauritania. They all share the XOF, which is the CFA. But I don't think it's the same thing with.
I think it would bolster the economy quite a lot if they had one centralized currency, in my opinion. But I don't think all 59 countries are going to come to that.
Probably not. But they're trying to, I do know that they're trying to make more of an effort to have maybe like sort of to expand the African Union and work more progressively on that, which is a really big deal because there are so many countries and there are so many things that the countries can be working on together to make the whole continent thrive, which it should be.
Are relationships within Africa quite frayed between states and countries?
It really depends on the country. So, like, for example, I'm looking into focusing on conflict in Africa specifically and the effects of conflict, because I think it's a really important thing that people aren't paying attention to. For example, it's not maybe necessarily a conflict, but a few years ago there was a natural disaster in Sierra Leone, and I have a personal connection to Sierra Leone. I have a lot of friends that are from Sierra Leone, and there was a huge natural disaster, a big mudslide, which was caused by the building of new sort of apartments. There was this huge mudslide. It killed over 1,000 people, but it wasn't talked about in the media, which is shocking. 1,000 people compared to maybe 5 people that were shot in a school shooting in America, which happens every day basically. But this huge thing that happened, and I went back to England after the summer, and I said to my friends, like, did you hear about this? Not one was on their radar. And I like to assume that the people that I spend time with are well informed, but not one of them heard about it. So it's something that, as a photographer, I find, especially as somebody that's grown up 16 years in Africa for the most part, it's something that I hold very personally, and I get really upset and really frustrated that it's not sparking on anyone's radar.
I think like the media and like the news in general is kind of crazy how you're so like tunnel vision of your country, or I mean all you hear about in the news at the moment is Brexit and Trump, right? And then like occasionally a few other things seep through, and it's like, unless we're like really like actively going out and finding stuff, which like we should, but the reality is like you get notifications on your phone all the time, and it's all just about the same stuff, and we just lose like perspective in the world.
Absolutely. I was surprised from moving to the UK after being in Senegal for so long. When I moved to Leeds, I didn't know that there was such thing as a BBC Yorkshire, which really blew my mind. I've never watched the news that's not global news, and to find out that there are people that are probably single-handedly only watching BBC Yorkshire. I was sort of like...
Because the UK is such a small country anyway.
It's tiny.
Yeah, it makes no sense.